Hello and welcome back to MoneyLIVE Autumn Festival, the big meetup. Great to have you all with us in the studio and also wherever you are in the world right now. First of all, we are now moving on to fraud, financial crime and security in a digital-first world with some wonderful speakers for the next hour and a half. Starting off with, in a second, with Francisco Menes, who is the Global Head of Data Analytics and Business Financial Crime Risk at HSBC. So a top player here with us in just a second. So in a second, we will welcome Francisco onto the stage. Francisco, come on. Great to have you with us. Good to see you.
Very nice to meet you.
Off you go.
All right. So thanks, Linda, for the introduction. Thanks for the big opportunity to be here and talk a little bit about taking a customer-centric approach in financial crime prevention. When they actually called me to speak at this event, I thought it was a very fine coincidence because just a few weeks ago we had a big workshop back in the bank about precisely this. How can we be more customer-centric in basically what we do in preventing financial crime? How can we do the things we do and trying to go after the bad guys and identify bad transactions and all those things that we try to do, having the lesser impact on the customer. And that thing went on for like 3 hours. And when the minutes came out a couple of days later, the first line of the minutes pretty much read, "The lines of business don't seem to agree about the definition of a customer," which pretty much explains, how complex this subject is and how tricky, can be keeping that balance that I'll be talking in a couple of minutes. And when I was doing these notes, actually one of the things I realized is this is really new to me. I mean, I was never born into anything or professionally speaking, into the concept or the notion of customer journeys or having a customer impact on what we do. As a matter of fact, I'm not a banker by trade. I used to do military intelligence, and when you do things like targeting, actually you do want to have friction with some customers. So one of the things that I realized is that you always run into what I call the three-pillar friction dilemma. And I can always picture myself trying to build a wooden stool like 3 legs, and then go and try to sell it to somebody, and somebody looking at me and say, "That's never going to work. It's never balanced," because it's really, really tricky exercise. And you have to keep into to consideration things like you need to have a good customer experience. You can have your customers, being alienated or raising a lot of customer complaints. You don't want to raise your operational costs. Nobody wants that. You don't want to reduce your operational costs to the point that you're stopping being effective, and you have things like you cannot be on the phone enough, and then your customers are again going to raise a lot of customer complaints, and you need to be prepared to suffer some losses. So you also need to take that into consideration. Another dimension of the dilemma is systems, process, and training is the things we do, like I was saying before, everything we do to try to stop financial crime or to prevent financial crime, and what is the impact on the customer. And again, it's something for 10 years ago, I don't think we were so aware of this notion as we are now. And I'll give you an example. Some time ago, somebody comes to the team and he says, "Do you think you could detect these transactions over this particular list of cryptocurrencies?" And we say, "We'll give it a go." And then we do it and develop a detection methodology, and we detect these transactions. And then the customers we find that we believe that they be operating outside risk appetite, we call the countries, we send the list and say, "I think you should probably review those customers." And then it follows the typical customer review. And some of these reviews entail that sometimes the bank has to call you and ask for an explanation of what are these transactions involving virtual currencies. If you don't pick the phone a number of times, they'll probably do one thing, that is inhibit your account. So they'll basically block your account. If things go really wrong, they'll probably kick you out of the bank and they'll initiate an exit process. So a month goes by, fast forward a month, 2 months, we're starting to get results, and actually we get good feedback. People are saying, this methodology is effective because, being as simple as it is actually detecting, this traffic that we were really concerned about. And then the person that, got us on the room, then he turned around and said, "Well, by the way, customer complaints are growing." And we were like, ouch, because you're achieving what you want to do, which is, pick those transactions and potentially identify customers that will be operating outside your risk appetite, so potentially doing things that you're not interested when you're not interested, for them to happen. But at the same time, you're also picking customers that are completely legit. They're doing legitimate business, and you don't want them to be part of that, to be part of that problem. So what do we do? And essentially it was an easy fix. We went back to the drawing table. We had to review the process. We had to basically come up with a series of indicators that essentially tells you, at the, let's say, the smoking gun level, this person is transacting with virtual currencies in a way, using some markets, using some products that we don't want them to. We don't want this to happen. And then we stop those customers. But before that, we had to go through the process of, having to listen to bad feedback. And rightfully so. And what happens sometimes in financial crime is precisely this. You apply those controls, and the stricter your controls are, the more impact you're going to have on your customer, and you don't want that to happen. And then what I'll talk about over the next few minutes is not what you should do, but it's things that we realize over the years, that things that are best practices or things that you should keep in mind when you're developing your financial crime risk framework and your data analytics processes in order to be able to still complete your mission, but at the same time, you're let's say, the man in the shadow. The customers, they don't even know you exist, but you're still protecting them and you're still protecting the bank. All right, so, and one of them is understand your enemy. Is always develop a typologist library, a financial crime typologist library. And probably half of you are thinking, well, that's an obvious one. Well, yeah, but you don't know how many times, we walk into a place and say, what is your library? And they said, well, we don't have one. Or we're just looking at, the trends over the last few years. And that's not the way it should be. And it's a problem that especially becomes very complex when you're operating in organizations like, for example, mine, like HSBC, where it's spread across just in retail banking in more than 34 countries, or more than 30 countries, sorry. And what happens is that countries will face different typologies depending on the activities they do, the culture they follow, the type of economic activity they perform. So you could be looking at a place like Singapore, where your typologies would be more aligned to trade-based money laundering, or others like Malta, where they'll be more on human trafficking or money mules. And one size is never going to fit all. Countries hate somebody from Canary Wharf, from the big HSBC tower, telling them what to do. So one of the problems was developing a typology that doesn't have to work for everybody, but it has to work for every single person in the country. So we let the countries do their own typologies, and we act as a library. And then another point that we realized very quickly, you have to know your data. Because when you will raise your controls, when you will start doing things that may have an impact on your customer, you should be aware of what are the data fields that are going to affect the customer. So for example, if we implement a control that is looking at employment data, which is something that changes very often, we need to be aware that when we will do that, it's going to trigger a series of phone calls, or it's going to trigger a series of letters and emails that will force the customer to answer, and it's going to cause friction. So yes, you may be able to implement that control to levels that you're very satisfied, but you've got to pay a price in terms of customer experience. So I'm not saying that you should do one or the other, but what you definitely need to do is keep those ones in a good balance. And then the last one is, again, pretty obvious. You need to train, you need to learn, and you need to adapt. But then you walk into into places, and then you will ask, when was the last time you updated your typologist library? And they said, well, before lockdown. I said, that's not going to work, because that's another world. Customer habits have changed. That means a change in the data we collect from them. That means a change on customer behavior. So whatever you were doing before COVID-19, I'm not saying it's not going to work, but definitely it's going to work in a different way. And again, the key of all this, of keeping your customer happy, is building trust. We're trusting banks to keep our money safe. We're trusting our customers to be good customers, not to use the bank services and products, to launder money or to commit fraud or do other crimes. So in order to build trust, it works pretty much the same way when we meet somebody out there. You get to know a person. You don't meet somebody in 30 seconds, you say, you want to come to my place. That's not how it works. You build a relationship, you learn to know this person, you gather data on this person, and then you build that trust. And the more you know about this person, the more you know about these habits, the more you can put this person into, I'm not worried about this customer, or I think I should be worried about this one. So one of the things that you should do in order to reduce those friction levels is target your reviews. You can't go around targeting everybody inside just because they do things like moving from country A to country B, which is something that customers typically don't do, and it could be indicative of some suspicious behavior. But you cannot do that, because if you end up reviewing every single customer of those, you're going to have high operational costs, which you don't want, and you might have to make X phone calls to customers, X emails to customers, and they're not going to be happy about it. So you need to be prepared to build a framework using data, and we'll get to that, the relationship between customer-centric and being data-driven, that will allow to know your customer, and will allow to know your customer in a way that you reduce the interaction to your customer, but at the same time, you get to know him better. You need to build better profiles, and a good example is if you let a profile go stale, and we're talking about, imagine a university graduate 5 years ago on a £30,000 annual salary, then 5 years now, fast forward 5 years, he's become a successful senior manager, he's probably bought some apartment in southern Spain, and he's making payments for that mortgage. Because the system still thinks that he's the university graduate on 30 grand a year, he keeps growing alerts, he keeps generating alerts. We need to investigate those alerts, operational costs. We probably need to call the customer, back customer experience. So you need to keep those profiles, those customer profiles up to date. Otherwise, you fall into that vicious circle over and over again. You also reduce friction, and I believe one of my colleagues will talk about fraud in a minute, and probably they'll talk about how we can protect customers better. And you introduce measures that don't place the responsibility in the customer, but they help to build that trust, because they empower the customer to take control of their own risk on being a victim of financial crime. And one example is, many financial institutions have developed this freeze card button, that if I see something dodgy on my credit card or my debit card or on one of my transactions, I can push a button in my app, automatically freezes everything. And one thing very, very important, internally, there's a lot of friction. You need to reduce that corporate internal friction in order to reduce the friction outside. And I'll give you an example. More and more we see typologies that combine money laundering with fraud. But when you walk into your office, basically either you do AML or you do fraud. And you will talk to somebody in AML and say, can I have some transaction monitoring data? And say, who are you? Oh, I work in fraud. No. So why? I say, because we don't share data. This is AML and you're fraud. And the bad guys know that. And the bad guys, the reason why they are so clever is because they know exactly how we work. And they know that we're constrained by those corporate silos that doesn't exist. They don't exist in that world. So I don't even imagine a conversation between two bad guys and saying, so you do fraud? And say, no, I actually do everything. I do fraud, and then I get the proceeds of fraud, and I go to the bank, and I try to launder those proceeds. So they're not constrained by those walls, by those silos, but we are. So you need to reduce those silos in order to share data, in order to share process, in order to talk to each other, and in order to be able to basically walk across those different typologies. All right? And we're wrapping up, very quick, takeaways. You need to find a customer-centric balance. Has to stop being an option. It's like, when we're talking about data, which is actually the next point. If you remember a few years ago, or not so long ago, we were talking about, when you were talking about, data and databases, garbage in, garbage out. That is not acceptable anymore. You cannot deploy a multi-million artificial intelligence transaction monitoring system only to be fed with bad quality data. Because then it's the equivalent to you're spending a lot of money in a car, and then you either don't drive it or then you don't maintain it. So it never ends well. So another part of the debate is, should we become customer-centric or data-driven? And the answer is both, because you're going to need the data to know the customer. You don't know the customer, you cannot build that trust. You cannot build that trust, you're probably going to put the customer through processes that you don't want to, because you're going to have to pay the price for a bad customer experience. And again, you need the data to build that trust. And I'm biased because I'm the head of data analytics, so I'm always going around asking for more data. And the more you understand how you can use the data, the more you understand the typologies you're facing, and especially now where you're facing new emergent technology, you're facing typologies, mixing cybercrime, money laundering, and fraud, you're going to have to go to non-traditional data sources. 5 years ago, we never thought in money laundering that we needed IP addresses. And now, we really need IP addresses. Because you see things like money mules receiving money from cryptocurrency scams that happen on the other side of the world, and then you see fraud being converted into money laundering and the proceeds, probably going, through the other side. In order to identify where that money came from, you need the IP address. Because modern telecommunications, they don't display, I live in Millfields 89. It doesn't work that way. You're going to need, the IP address. And again, it's evolving so fast that you're really going to need that pointer reference, those typologies libraries that will tell you, these are the indicators, you need to look for this, and this is where you need to find the data. And again, last is a quote from somebody who was not in the banking industry, but knew a lot about bad guys, and he knew that they work together very well, so we need to do the same. And I believe that's right on time, so thank you very much.
Perfect timing. Thanks very much. Okay, next up is our fireside chat on the power of analytics and AI in the fight against fraud. Let's meet our wonderful guests. First of all, Matt Tatarin. Hello, Matt. How are you?
Nice to meet you, Lyndon. Very good, thank you.
Tell us who you are, what you do.
So my name is Matt Tatarin. I'm the head of financial crime at Tide. I don't know how many people have heard about Tide, but we are a business service provider for small and medium-sized enterprises. We've been at Tide really since the starting days. I've been just over 2.5 years, so we joined about 30,000 members. We're now up to nearly 400,000, currently just above 6% market share. So there's been some real changes in the last 2.5 years, and fraud has been an exciting part of it, if you can call it exciting.
And scary. And Sean Neary. Hello, Sean. How are you?
I'm good, thank you very much.
Tell us who you are, what you do.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Sean Neary. I'm the head of fraud and financial crime for Featurespace, which is a AI ML company protecting against fraud and financial crime specifically. My history actually is over 15 years in fraud, financial crime in the banking sector, and I thought I'd jump across the dark side, as they call it, which is the vendor life, to try and build a product for our customers.
We'll find out more, I'm sure, as we talk. Matt, kick us off, first of all. What for you have been the big new features of fraud in the last 18 months?
Yeah, so I don't know whether it's new features or old trends is probably actually it. So through the pandemic, people have had much more time. People have been obviously from the sort of the bottom end under more pressure from a financial perspective. And I think people have just turned more to the simple items, in regards to purchase scams, things of a nature that are really happening in a digital era. And that has certainly been where people have put a lot of pressure. Money mules, as Francisco already mentioned, has been, a huge area where it has been targeted. Certainly there's a lack of education and a lack of understanding around the impact that those things have. And, that has been really the resurgence of what it has been. We've gone into this lockdown. Everyone's sort of been unaware of what is happening, and they've kind of gone to the old trends of what it was previously. And, you'd think it may have got more complex, but actually I think it's just got more simplistic, but on the masses. And that sometimes is harder to fight.
The principles might not change much, but the mechanisms do, obviously, Sean.
Yeah, the mechanisms do, and I think that's actually the major change is everyone was shifted to become digital. So there's a huge demographic that actually quite avoided digital channels. They went shopping, they want to go online, they want online banking, they were quite happy to go to the brick and mortar sort of bank. And they were forced to move on to this channel, which they probably would have felt vulnerable, but they had no choice. So as a result of that, then the data sort of grew, access to data, so compromise then grew naturally. With then the channels and introductions of things like the dark web and the deep web has enabled also not unsophisticated chances, these younger fraudsters who see on social media that it's easy just to get a pizza for free by using these other channels. And unfortunately, so we're seeing this mass growth in fraudsters. They might be as sophisticated as the original organised gangs, but they're still committing the same type of fraud. So that has then changed the landscape and who we're looking for and how we're trying to detect it. And we saw that real surge. But the technique's all the same. It's just a channel you have access to. Social media being a big part of that.
And it's so difficult when there are so many individuals rather than the organised side where you have a big target to look at. Anything else driving the changes for you, Matt?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned there, it's harder to sort of see through the fog and find the person at the end of it. And I think the demographic around money mules, as you mentioned, of people coming online has really changed. Like the profile of a money mule probably 18 months, 24 months ago was pretty easy. Like somebody at university, somebody who has a lack of access to funds and wants to make money very, very quickly. And that changed a lot. Like you went to certain different age demographics, locations, and the way in which people were recruiting individuals to do so was something that was not what you expected. And that was where you have to change the tactic approach of how you then identify it. But that identifying piece is still the smokescreen behind, how you get to the problem at the end, which is those organised groups that are affecting that. And, that is the biggest issue with fraud, right, is that you can catch a mule at the front end and you catch them 10 to the dozen, it's great, but are you actually stopping the problem? And are you actually getting to the issue that is behind there, as I like to call them, a muleherder, who's, the person pulling the strings? And that's been much more difficult the more digital we've gone, because it's just been easier for people to recruit.
With a muleherder, as you call it, there's also potentially a run-up or a repeat behaviour. So that, again, you have that target where you can continue to monitor and jump in when the time is right. But what have been the big challenges on speed of response, Sean? And how do we start? Let's look at the AI and the analytics side of it. How do you start to now, even with the individuals doing this stuff, start to step in and get an idea of what's going on?
Yeah, it's difficult. So we talked a lot about data. I think the sessions before we were talking about the ethical use of data. Fraud is in there. The huge surgence in access to it does it. But can your technology change at the same speed that the fraudsters are, the trends and also the products that are being introduced? So there's new products being brought in by sort of neobanks, general digital sort of prepaid cards. So there's more ways to become a mule. So it's then actually then, how do I get on top? At what part of the journey do I need to come in to prevent against fraud? And what do I do analytically? I can't just rely constantly on rules, because then I'm constantly doing an analysis. I have to write that rule. It might have only been effective for a week or less than a week, and it might have only brought high false positives. So I need to introduce sort of your AI, and we hear about AI, and it's been around for a very long time. It was a buzzword about 5 years ago. Everyone does ML and AI now. But really, what does that actually mean? And there's AI of, I can use that technique to build the model, but then am I utilising the same techniques to continually update that model and adapt and adopt that model? The continuous change. That's something that's probably not used as often in a lot of technology, but it's something that we're seeing utilised more frequently in fraud, and it's really what's needed now. Spending changes, so our technology needs to change.
Presumably, with potentially smaller amounts being defrauded, the nature of the response is also different. So actually, it triggers, yes, a response if you catch it early enough, but actually then, of course, maybe a smaller size, for example, if that's the case. So actually, it's a very nuanced way to react as well as to catch the information as it happens.
It really is, and it's actually a very good point. So traditionally, you look at these sort of large amounts, and they do these huge one-off attacks that then come through due to a compromised and organised gang would buy this batch of cards for a specific bank. And as I was talking about these sort of younger fraudsters who are just buying people pizza and McDonald's and trainers and hats, they're starting to sort of convolute what really looks like genuine to the customer based on the digital spend. And that's harder to spot, and it introduces huge false positives. And you sort of saw Francisco talking about that trifecta of the balance of customer experience, operational effectiveness and fraud detection. How do you do that when you work in a world where everything looks genuine? And that's when you have to sort of shift your lens and what you're trying to profile, not looking at the trends that change too fast for you to change with it. It's really the customer is quite a constant here. And then if you look at it analytically and you try to say, what's the customer doing? Are they deviating? As a peer, are they all deviating? Because we have these seasonal spends and characters that everyone does and one-off life events. If you start to shift your analytical focus into that, you have a higher chance to then catch these frauds and these anomalies in those behaviours. And we found that to be quite effective in what we're doing in our technology.
Yeah, that's good. Matt, what about the different prediction models and how they work together? We've heard of quite a few. You need to be really nimble, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think, as Sean mentioned, there's some really valuable points around changing, not just looking at transactional behaviour, but life behaviour and how somebody uses your platform. we're creatures of habit, right? We're people. So the way that somebody interacts on their banking app is going to be very, very regular. It's going to be very common as to see if that is that person. It's hard when it's the first time. So building profiles of what you expect from a certain group, using synthetic data sets to be able to identify what that person predictively should be doing, and then do you think that's happening? Even to the nth of like the time that somebody logs on or the location that they log on, and when they log on, do they then check their savings account before they check their current account? I think that's where we have to be more nimble, like you say. It's gone of the old of like trying to catch transactions that are happening. You've got to look at wider behaviours. You've got to look at wider data sets. And that really enables you to actually then find a trend before it's happening. And usually what you have is a couple of instances that will confirm that, and you will have a predictor, and you have to then identify at what point you're going to kick that in to start blocking things or to start stopping things. Because Francisco mentioned and Shaw mentioned that the service side, like everybody wants service now. And the problem is that service is a great thing for all of us that use the apps. It's a nightmare for risk and compliance because we're the ones that are actually trying to deflect the service to be able to disrupt the behaviour. And that causes a lot of internal pressure that, Francisco was mentioning. But it's about finding a balance. Sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong. And you can't live in fear of that when things are moving so quick.
Yes, the last thing you want to do is block a transaction on the first thing that customer does. But of course, that you may well have to do. Have you ever done that, Sean? Have you had to block an initial transaction?
Yeah, it constantly happens. There's always going to be that false positive. And before you would, you'd get through it and the customers were quite a lot more loyal because the products weren't there.
Yeah.
Now, the back of wallet is the big problem. There's a huge concern that actually, my card declined, I'm not using them again. If I ever go abroad or I want to do a high purchase, I'll use another account that I have. I'll have like 3 or 4 accounts. It's too easy to open them up now, especially with digital pans and things like that. I haven't got to wait for a card to turn up. I can get access straight away and do the spending. So that's scary, and that does drive reticence to change. And you're battling with your customer experience teams on you want to introduce these new strategies, and they're like, well, hold on, what about the false positives? What about my customer experience, my NPS score? I heard that was talked about earlier in some of the data. So it's a battle, but the technology such as AI is helping get around that, and the broader aspects of getting wider data like online activities and my behaviour in line, not just the transaction.
So the wider data comes in, you can build supervised or unsupervised AIs, but basically what you're doing is starting to, before the first transaction, you're trying to build a picture of that customer.
Yes, essentially. It's exactly that. And the thing is you talk about supervised and unsupervised, and it's a bit deeper because actually the techniques are only useful depending on the problem you're trying to solve. For example, so you're supervised, you've got all the data to utilise for training, so actually you can get that general behaviour, stick it against peers or individuals. So that's great in sort of the general fraud and stuff, but unsupervised is really where you need to use for AML, where you don't have those huge labels of the constant label that come in within months instead of years, which happens in AML. Or onboarding, never seen a customer before. So you really want to ensemble these two types of techniques together to then create that best of breed model. There's not a single sort of solution or a silver bullet. But data is definitely key to everything.
I'm going to do one of our left-hand, right-hand polls, because I always do in our sessions today. Left-hand, right-hand. Okay, so left-hand is the onboarding for you, if you're in the fraud prevention business. Left-hand for you is onboarding is the problem, and right-hand is continuing customer behavior. Now, it may not be that there's any contest in this, but I'm going to ask anyway. For anybody, left-hand, onboarding is my biggest problem right now, and people are defrauding me at point of contact. Okay, interesting. 0. I'll get a few right hands in case everyone's asleep. Right hand that it's continuing customer behavior. Yeah, we've got more customer behavior on the right. So that's interesting, actually, Matt. And look, I mean, yes, of course, for some, onboarding is the point when they just jump in and take a bite out of you straight away. But continuing customer behavior, clearly very important as well.
Yeah, it's a big thing, right? And as behaviours are changing, as Sean mentioned, people are actually building profiles that seem legitimate, and these groups are acting in a way to say, okay, use your account for a certain period of time, do this, I'll pay for it, whatever, and then start to act and then start to move. And as you mentioned, the values as well have changed. Like there isn't this focus on trying to make a huge amount of money instantly. It's just the mass approach that we'll keep going and we'll keep going and we'll keep going. And so many things now on the internet that you see of educational videos and pieces like that of where it's starting to get better, But the side that's missing is still the impact of people who are getting caught. There isn't a punishment to the point that deflects you from wanting to do that. As a young individual who has limited understanding and limited access to a lot of those points, seems like a great idea. Sell my details, give my account to somebody, and I make a pizza. Wonderful. There isn't that understanding on the other side of what that is actually causing. What are your details being used for? Where is that money going to, and what impact can it have? I went and did a piece at a school not long ago, and the biggest thing that came out of people saying, what is the impact if you get caught for doing fraud, was, I'm not going to be able to get a mobile phone contract. And that was the biggest worry that people had at that age. And that just shows like the lack of understanding of where it then goes, and the lack of education, which I think is a big thing we need to address. And it's quite hard, like, whose responsibility is that, of where does it sit to, educate the youth of what those problems are.
I'm surprised you didn't just turn to them and say, yes, that's right, stop it. That would have been an interesting response.
No, I think we need to get a little bit deeper, but it wasn't the right session on that one.
Yes. What about behaviour? So is it more useful, since we have a lot of data coming in through, not only from customers' behaviour, but also fraudsters' behaviours? Is it more useful to go down the fraudsters' behavioural mapping route or customer behaviour? Because, they've all got a lot of behaviour. Which one would you focus on?
We focus on the fraudster side, which I think is data that's already there, but there's a lot of focus around the unknown unknowns and known unknowns and what points you have, and that's always, which tunnel do you want to go down and how dirty do you want to get your fluffy white tail. But the known unknowns are obviously the good things to begin with. As long as you've got those simplistic things to start with, you'll usually get an overlap of what you're going to get as your unknown unknowns, and then you start to be able to identify them. So I would always err on the side, and this is more probably the position that I'm in with the company that I work for, is that we are going to be targeted by more simplistic items that we've probably seen in other areas. So focus on what the fraudster pattern is, and they're probably going to evolve to do the same thing that they've done at another fintech bank. And you've probably heard about it already, or and you can pick up those items quicker.
Yeah. Unknown unknowns are just knowns yet to be known, aren't they? How far can I go with that one?
I just need to try and understand what you just said, to be honest. It's a good tongue twister.
But do you find looking at mapping out the fraudster's behaviour is also a very good way to look at this at the moment?
It's a must. It's traditional.
Must.
It's
is it the traditional way for you? Yeah.
Fraud. So you do start off with that baseline,
Yeah,
that understanding of what the fraud trends are, and because those trends do sort of be consistent.
Yeah.
But actually, you need to go a bit further than that. You need to profile sort of what we call general entities. So if you think in a card space, it's what. If you don't look at the customer, look at the merchant, look at the MCC, the sector, the region, the location. They all have their individual profiles and what looks normal for them, put that on top of then the fraud, you're really going to be able to narrow down what actually is fraud versus genuine. Because unfortunately, there are customers out there, especially sort of in the business space, who do operate like a fraudster, and you don't want to keep stopping them because they're going to leave you as a customer, and they're going to go to that back of wallet. So by introducing this understanding of that customer and then adding that on top of the knowns fraud, known knowns, then you'll find yourself to pinpoint and be a lot more accurate.
We've got a few minutes left. A couple of questions. First of all, what are those big unknowns? What are the big hurdles for banks, do you think, at the moment? Things that are really causing problems or could cause problems in the next stages?
Crypto.
Crypto? Yep.
Take a big deep breath when everybody says that, because we all love crypto.
Right.
I don't know if it's an unknown unknown. It's definitely a known unknown. Like, we know the risk with crypto, right? It says it on the tin. We're an unregulated currency.
Yep.
Like, it's very obvious. But, the problem is the demand for it now. Like, everybody wants it. That's what it is. And that's that balance of the service element is, if you want to go and take a big bite of the pie, you've got to take the risk with it. And that's certainly a difficult one to balance out of where you go in that direction, I would say.
And institutional investment is happening right now, so it's a big deal. Yeah. And finally, what's your message to anybody here and anyone watching us to how to proactively prevent fraud? Where do we go from here? Look, I think you've given us a good map out of your thinking, but where can we go next to predict trends, to get the right models in place, and to work in the right direction? What do you think?
So I think the first thing that I'd recommend is don't make this a reactive response to investment inside your business. It's too often that people would wait for a huge attack or regulation to come in place, and then you're on the back foot already based on time and investment. So if you have the ability to make sure you have it in your plans and it's at the forefront of your mind, and every year you invest into it. But you'll then have your legacy platforms, your new platforms, and your data structure, and you need to make sure that's actually there and is in place, and really take time to understand what's available to you and when, what happens in production versus offline, because speed and real time is needed, sometimes the data you get is not what you get in real time, so you actually only have half a decision in factor.
Yeah.
So I would sort of recommend to understand your data, the architecture of that data and the platforms you have in place, to be the foundation to making better models and better decisions overall.
Yeah. And I wonder whether integration of fraud into different functions might be a useful thing. Would you, because you mentioned right at the start that you're seen to be the people holding up the show a bit, and nobody wants that.
Yeah. It's education, isn't it, for everybody internally of, why is it we're doing it and what's the reason in place. And I think you have to look at it at what you're trying to achieve. Like if you're trying to meet the regulatory standard of what it is, you're not going to reduce fraud, right? You have to see your success level as above that. The regulation is the starting point of where we begin of what you need to meet to then, lower those demands. But you've got to invest in it. And if you're going to invest in something, people have to understand it. And, Francisco mentioned the costs that come with those operational sides. It's not even the operational sides now, the data sides, the tech sides of what you want to build. Like we talk about, as Sean mentioned, machine learning, artificial intelligence, which everybody loves to say and loves, as their buzzwords, but it's expensive. If you want to start to put into those pieces what it means, that's the hard side. And that's where people have to understand it. People have to realize in your business when you're there as a compliance function, what it is you're actually trying to achieve. And actually, from a servicing perspective, you're improving that service because you're protecting the genuine users of your platform to stop people from being victims. And that, I think, is the balance of what you see. Second-line defence teams, even to a point, first-line defence teams are very hard to quantify from a monetary perspective of, yes, we've saved X or Y, but what have we done compared to the marketing function who've increased market share by 3%? And actually, I've closed 1,500 accounts this month, which then has reduced our market share, which when we go to investors is then an issue. So it's all about balance and education, I think.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much to Matt, to Sean as well for joining us. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you. You are watching the Autumn MoneyLIVE Festival. Welcome back. Great to have you with us in the studio and also at home around the world. Let's now meet Andy Renshaw from Feedseye for an interview and case study. Andy, join us on the stage. Take a seat.
Thank you.
Make yourself comfortable. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
Very good. Good to see you again. Tell us who you are and what you do, first of all, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so Andy Renshaw, I work at Feedseye. I work in product management, and my job at Feedseye is making sure that the products we build resonate for the customers in the market.
Yeah.
In terms of background, I've grown up in large banks, Capital One, Citibank, Lloyds Banking Group, focusing on both fraud prevention and investment in fraud strategies.
Brilliant. And we're talking about risk ops, fraud prevention in the digital-first world. First of all, tell us a little bit about the recent Q3 industry reports. What are the key things there? Please refer to any stats and figures that you have for us.
Yeah, I'm going to break a rule, and I've brought notes for, I think, for the first time ever. But we've seen some interesting trends, some surprising, some less so. But I guess what we've seen in our Q3 report is significant change in behaviour.
Okay.
Some of that has been caused by essentially coming out of the pandemic. Yeah. And I think some of that is more long-term. And actually, Sean referred to in the previous session around this move towards digital, which we're seeing. Yeah. But materially, we've seen about a 50% drop in cash transactions. Probably not a surprise, given that people need less access to cash, especially if they're staying at home. That's been replaced by debit card transactions and online growth. Again, that's probably something we'd expect from a consumer aspect. But what's also been interesting is we've seen businesses make that move as well. So businesses are accessing cash less, and they're actually moving online to do their day-to-day transactions too.
Yeah.
And I think one of the really interesting things that we saw is we've seen a huge growth, 150% growth in P2P payments, people making small payments to their friends and individuals. And the best example I keep using of this is the split the bill analogy. When you used to go into a restaurant, everybody either used to drop their card down or put their £20 or $20 now. And actually now what's happening is we're seeing people, one person's making the payment and everybody's making that micro transaction through an app in the background. So we've seen this huge growth in P2P payments as well. From a risk perspective, interestingly, the value per fraud case has gone up. So the fraudsters are extracting more each time, although the single transaction value has gone down. So they're doing more transactions and achieving essentially a better outcome.
Right.
And banking fraud attacks in the last year from our data have actually more than doubled. So as people have moved online, unfortunately, so have the fraudsters. And in terms of the specific fraud types we're seeing, I think for the first time, 4 out of the top 5 fraud types were scams. We know scams are prevalent, but I've never seen it so dominant. Yeah. And probably 2 things going on there. Those traditional scams around playing on trust, people pretending to be government officials, position authority, or pressure, that, oh, your account's under attack, move your money now type of thing. Yeah. But then on top of that, we're seeing things, and I think, again, in the previous session, we talked about purchase scams coming in now, and then health scams as well, vaccine-based scams coming in. So really riding the topic of the day. So they're the big trends we're seeing from a risk perspective.
Right, so quite a lot to unpack there, but let's look at those risks first of all. Going forward, what do you think is here to stay at the moment? If you can predict that, where are we going, do you think?
Yeah, I keep thinking about this as a 1 + 1. What everything's saying to us right now is we're seeing almost these digital scams, it starts to embed. So unfortunately, I think they're here to stay. But also what we're seeing to some extent is the return of more traditional and more simple fraud. For example, tourist fraud, pickpocketing. What was interesting, some of those cities we're seeing, especially in the US where fraud is the fastest rising, are actually tourist destinations. So we are seeing that opportunistic fraud come back. So unfortunately, I think, and again, this probably plays a little bit in the previous session, I think those techniques and mechanics are here to stay. My sense is the fraudsters have sharpened the saw almost here. They've sharpened their techniques and they're here to stay. What we'll see evolve is almost the nature of the conversation. Are they playing on fear around health? Are they playing on purchase? And I think that will evolve. I think the topic will change, but these techniques unfortunately look well embedded right now.
We did a sort of left-hand, right-hand poll in the last session. Also, we heard from Sean and from Matt about what they're seeing. They were talking about onboarding, and actually the guys here in the audience are talking about repeat customer behaviour. Is there any way of unpacking that and working out some, if there are 2 areas or, a variety of areas around that landscape we can look at?
Yeah, I mean, onboarding for us is definitely a hot topic, but I would say that continuous customer behaviour is the topic, and the move away from transactional behaviour to continuous customer assessment, being diligent around knowing what your customers are doing at a macro level, taking all the data out there, and I guess as people have moved online, the beauty of that is there is far more data in the online space than there is in the cash space. So one of the things that does present institutions with is an opportunity to use more data to make better decisions. Yeah. So I would say that continuous behaviour and the ability to exploit almost that online behaviour from the customers is something that's a hot topic for us right now.
Yeah, and it's sort of in a macro way. I would always say, how do you think like a fraudster? How do you get there? But I suppose it's in the data, isn't it? It's got to be in the data.
I think it is in the data. Probably one of the things, I'm conscious I work for an AI machine learning company, but I'm going to go slightly off my remit. Is
we can go a bit human if you want to.
Yeah, exactly. I always think of it as both an art and a science. I think it is important to use the data, but it is also important not to forget to think about the human behaviour behind it. Why is somebody feeling pressured? What emotions are the fraudsters exploiting? Yeah. And how can you start to build trust? How can you start to build certainty with customers? So I tend to think of it both through the data side, but also that human and emotional side as well. And I actually think it's only when they come together that you get a really powerful outcome.
Yeah, and certainly anecdotally I've heard, and I'm sure you have too, of friends, family, others who've had one of those texts come through or a WhatsApp message or an email come through that is actually a little bit more worrying. So the risk that you feel as a customer has been higher. and that's happened a lot more when we've been isolated by the pandemic. Have you found that as well?
Yeah, I've definitely found that. I mean, again, I've got family members that have fallen prey to that, so I've definitely got personal experience of that. I think one of the interesting things about actually within the pandemic is people haven't almost been able to just ask the person next to them.
Yeah.
You know, even just that common sense check has disappeared. So I don't know if it's more prevalent. I think it probably is, but I think a lot of it is actually just that ability to check in with somebody has almost disappeared, and I think that's one of the things that unfortunately people have been playing on. And hopefully as we move out, that's one of the things that will hope maybe fade away.
Yeah. Anybody else in the audience here today found that as well? It just was one hand up. Have you found these anecdotal stories of people around you falling foul to a couple there, a few. So there are quite a few. Yeah, people at the back as well. Thank you very much. So it's definitely been out there and happening, and it is an anecdotal thing in many ways. What about risk ops? How can that help us?
So I think the idea of risk ops is to look at this in a more holistic fashion. You know, let's talk about risk rather than detection and prevention. And ultimately, I think there's a few things there. We've talked about AI, machine learning, and data, but one of the big things we're trying to focus on is human-centered AI. That thing I'm talking about, capturing the emotion, capturing the intent, capturing just the logical journey. What is someone trying to do and why they're trying to do it? Yeah. And then it's about being comprehensive and collaborative. I think Francesco talked about fraud and AML. I think he gave this example of the fraud person trying to get the AML data. Well, with a platform approach, we can bring that data together and remove those silos. Silos really are apparent, and we've heard why. Fraudsters don't respect them. Criminals don't respect them. No. They prey on them. So having a platform where these things can be pulled together, where decisions can be made in a collaborative fashion, combined with powerful tools around AI, but with that human-centered outcome for us is the risk ops proposition and that potential.
We heard today about Yorkshire Building Society's work to digitally transform and to turn what it used to do for many years into something much more modern and much more automated in that case. Yeah. But to join up the dots and to become more ecosystem and led is very difficult. Is that the only way? Is that the best way to start to iron out some of these kinks? Because the kinks are where the criminals make their money out of sidestepping the rules rather than working to them.
I think it is the best way. What I would say is it's not the only way. And I think one of the advantages that, let's just say, more established organisations who maybe they've got a legacy problem around transition, I think one of the things they have got is the power of brand and the ability to reach customers through education. So whilst I think ultimately data, a single ecosystem is the way to go, I think education, being open and being transparent with customers is also a powerful way to go. And I would say the significant shift I've seen in the last 10 years is fraud, cybercrime, all of this used to be a little bit of a dirty word. It's like, don't talk to your customers about it because they'll know you're weak. I think the industry has moved significantly now to actually saying, do talk to customers about it, because actually we know they will feel safer. Their perception of safety goes up as well. So I think there's almost that hard way of solving it in terms of solid, not hard, it is difficult, but solid way of solving it through data. And then, but I wouldn't say, don't dismiss the soft side of it in terms of reaching out to customers as well.
The awareness of scams and the like is fairly well known. I used to investigate those things, and the rules that your bank won't be in touch with for this information, those things are pretty well known, I think, among the population, consumers. In business, it's slightly different, but of course you may have a fraud team in place. But as we take the journey from fraud detection to fraud prevention, how are we going to get there? And I'm going to go back to data to understand the trends as they evolve, literally as they evolve rather than anything else. Any other ideas on how we can move to a more preventative approach? Or is it all about the data?
No, I think it's about the data. Yep. It's about, but I think one of the things PSD2 has should it be successful, and hopefully it will be, through strong customer authentication, is created a framework where authentication is expected from customers. Yeah. So actually, whereas I think the old game used to be, do I authenticate and cause friction or not? I think that's moving on to how can I do authentication elegantly? And I do think smartphones, app-based authentication, natural biometrics in devices are all actually creating potentials to almost have a propositional play around authentication on top of back-end data and detection as well. So I do think it can be more embedded in the journey natively, actually, than it has been historically.
We've talked a lot about AI, whether it's augmented or artificial intelligence, and we talked about machine learning and so on, but actually it sounds as though you've got to work with customers. You've got to, because our devices are the way for you to know what's going on with your customer base.
Yeah, But there has to be trust there, otherwise people will wonder why that data is being collected. Is it being used appropriately, and is it being used contextually? So those golden rules around staying ethical, staying appropriate with what you do, I think have never been more relevant in terms of almost earning the right to use that data for effective outcomes.
We've talked a lot about ethics today as well.
Yeah.
And there is a concept, responsible AI. What does that mean to you? How does that come into play, do you think, Andy?
Yeah, I think it's about organisations taking responsibility for what they do and checking that again, they're doing that in the right way. I think ethics means different things to different people. It means fairness, it means accountability, but it also means transparency as well. And ultimately, it comes back to that rule. If somebody was to shine a light on what you were doing, almost if you had to come up here and explain it, would you be comfortable doing that to your entire customer base in front of you?
Yeah.
And can you stand behind it? And I think one of the dangers with AI is if you're not careful, you almost hide behind the fact that artificial intelligence are making decisions and it becomes a little bit opaque. So almost as these decisions become more advanced, they become more opaque. What we're talking about with responsible AI is reversing that out and actually having a high degree of transparency and fairness and really shining that light on where that's not being achieved.
Are there any common fears or factors or problems with when clients come to you and they, it may just be we want to have a really good view of where fraud's coming from, but are there any sort of big problems that hit your inbox when you first contacted?
I think it's different for different clients. I think a couple of interesting things are that there is a little bit of when you come and speak to maybe a vendor, often you want to do it because you want something to get better, which is obvious. But going back to what Francesco was saying, the danger is you will disrupt that triangle of customer experience and cost and almost the way you manage your risk. So I think one of the big challenges we find is actually people want certainty in the outcome whilst wanting to change the outcome as well. And those two things kind of push against each other. So how do you provide certainty on almost where an organisation is going to end up? Is their alert rate going to double, for example? Because maybe that actually needs to happen to stop the fraud. But if you've got 1,000 operators, where are you going to find another 1,000 from? So there is this weird tension between wanting an improved outcome, but actually knowing it will cause disruption in the organisation. And I think the second one is definitely still the move to cloud, the move to AI, the move to new technologies is still scary. And how can you provide certainty without a long-term track record as well? So how do you take that plunge into potential new outcomes, but without having that track record of 20, 30 years of what was likely to occur? So I think that's a big theme for us there. From one of the more interesting ones, it doesn't come up much, but I think it's almost societal that we're seeing now is also, if we're not careful, we're going to create an unbanked population. And one of the things we're starting to see from a regulatory standpoint now is actually, as we start to close mules down, as we start to find fraudsters, as we start to close these networks, where do those people then go? Because if you're moving them out of banking as a whole, where do they go? Do they actually go into the black market? And is that a better outcome in the end? Are they actually causing almost more severe crimes in black market economies than they actually were in what was essentially a mainstream fraud?
Is that really a significant fear in your eyes?
There is a significant fear, and I'm hearing more and more large organisations and regulators talk about this long-term trend towards creating an unbanked population as people go digital. And as data gets joined up, as you drop out of one organisation, as a fraudster, you won't get back in. And that's great to stop the crime, but where do they then go within society? And that's a really interesting long-term pattern to watch.
Really interesting. So look, fundamentally, how do we, as we close up in a few minutes' time, how do we combine a great customer experience, a great onboarding experience, a great continuing relationship with our customers, and anti-fraud measures? How do we start to do that? Because as Sean and Matt were telling us in the last time, they're not the most popular people in the company because they hold up the show a bit.
When I worked at Lloyds, I always used to think about the 99% as well as the 1%. Fraud is huge, but in any given organisation at any given time, it's probably going to be touching no more than 5% of your customers. So we should take comfort from that. But I think it is vital to think about how you're impacting the 95, the 97, the 98, the 99%. And if you can find win-wins there, then A, you're likely to get more investment, but B, you stop being that problem and you start being part of the proposition. So I do think working with product owners, customer journey designers, with actually saying, can risk actually help your proposition, can we actually help you take more risk in a considered fashion rather than stifling it, is ultimately where we'd like to get to, and data and the insights associated with that will be vital on that way. And I think the second thing is flexibility. Things don't have to stay true forever. Maybe you try something, it doesn't work. Have you thought about how you'll change and adapt if it's not working? So almost having that expectation of change rather than hardwiring things in, I think is crucial as well.
It's in some ways like the underwriter in insurance, is that you are evaluating risk. You know, you're really working it out, and they don't have a bad name. They have a name for, hopefully for accuracy, I'm sure that's true, for accuracy and helping the business to do what it should do well. So do you think fraud can be rephrased in that way?
Certainly, yeah, I think it can, but I think you need the insight to be able to do it. And I think the more refined the tools, the more refined the technology, the more you'll be able to make scalpel level decisions rather than kind of that blunt trauma, friction-inducing outcome.
Yeah. Andy Renshaw, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Brilliant to see you. Thank you. Thank you.
Do you want to dance?
Welcome back to the MoneyLIVE Autumn Festival. Great to have you with us for our final session of the day. This is a panel discussion with three wonderful experts. First of all, let's introduce them. We are talking about the future of fraud prevention, security, customer safety. First of all, Phil Bonnard. Hello, how are you?
Hello, very good. Thank you very much.
Tell us who you are and what you do.
My name is Phil Bonnard. I work for Lloyds Banking Group, and I head up design for payments, fraud, and financial crime.
Fantastic. Thanks very much indeed. And next up, we have Simon May. Simon, just tell us who you are, what you do.
I'm Simon, and I lead the analytics team at Nationwide Building Society. So we focus on our economic crime systems and keeping our customers safe.
Great, thank you very much. And last but not least, Chris Lewis. How are you, first of all, and what do you do?
Very good, thank you. Itching for the bar, like many people in the audience, I'm sure.
End of the day.
And thanks to everybody for making it this far. Head of Solutions at Synectic Solutions, with a service provider for a large account fraud data sharing consortium.
Great.
I'm responsible for consultancy and R&D.
Excellent. Great to have you all with us, and thanks for seeing us through the day and being here at the end. Everyone's been waiting for this moment. I know about that. I know that's certainly true. So, Phil, kick us off. For you, what are the most worrying crimes or financial crimes, frauds that we're not talking about enough? What bothers you?
What bothers me is that most people think that fraud is somebody going and stealing your money, when in actual fact it is somebody who asks you very nicely or convincingly, and you give it to them.
Yeah.
So what we're not talking enough about is the human factors that actually enable this kind of fraud to happen.
They're cleverly getting us to volunteer
Absolutely.
our information.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Simon, similar or different?
I would go different. So certainly in my normal working week, I talk a lot about authorized push payment scams.
Yeah.
In fact, that's most days for me. So I would go with perhaps card fraud. So there's a huge mountain of fraud there in cards, debit and credit cards, which I think because there's been so much focus on scams and digital banking and that kind of thing, maybe you've just forgotten about there's a huge mountain of fraud there taking place in cards that you've still got to work with. You've still got to deal with the volume. And you've got to have a plan for how that's going to shift and evolve as strong customer authentication lands and starts to embed. How's that going to shift your fraudster's behaviour? Are you going to have fewer cases with potentially higher losses, where they're then social engineering, and we're back to the focus being on the customer again? And how's that going to change the kind of production lines that we've all put in place to manage card fraud? Are we going to be able to use automated contact for that kind of thing, or are we going to need to do much more deep investigations? I think those are the things that concern me, but we don't talk about as much.
Okay, yes, nice fraudsters, cards, and Chris, what else?
I guess I'd, to be the fun police, talk about what people seem to have forgotten in bounce-back loan fraud and things that are related to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right.
Only in the news this morning, 8.6 billion of a universal credit-related fraud as a result of the pandemic. The amount of furlough fraud still hasn't really been accurately estimated by HMRC.
Yep.
The fraud advisory panel estimated 20 to 30 billion potentially lost in terms of exposure for BBLS. And when you consider UK Finance estimate there's only 3.5 billion of attempted fraud in financial services each year, the numbers don't really stack up. So I'd say what happened in March 2020 and since then.
Wow, that's a really good point. Look at the volume. Phil, where do you think our priorities should be? And of course, we all have our own views, but where should we spend our time and money, do you feel?
Well, as a designer, I'm obviously going to say we have to spend time and money in understanding the humans, because I think there's a misconception that we can go off to one of those wonderful vendors out there and say, hey, I'm going to buy one of your solutions and my fraud problem is going to go away.
Yeah.
It's not. Those systems might get better at detecting potential fraud, but you're still going to have genuine customers genuinely logging into their apps, genuinely setting up new beneficiaries, authenticating those transactions and then sending money. So what we really need to do is change behavior. And where we need to spend time and effort is to figure out ways how we can reach people specifically with the modus operandi that apply to them, because it's different across different people, and change their behavior. And that's really hard.
Chris, I'm assuming that you think we should stand outside HMRC and make sure that we knock the door down until they find out who it was.
Yeah, you've got me down to a 2 already.
And Simon, there is, we talked to Andy in the last session about open ecosystems and how they can actually potentially close the gaps. But does it actually potentially open up also gaps and risks to fraud? What do you feel about that?
So in our experience, not just yet, I think we've seen criminals experimenting with open banking at the moment, and that's probably all we've seen so far. I think what was good is we had, as an industry generally speaking, we thought a lot about how criminals might attack open banking, and we did some good prep, and we put some good controls in place up front, and we had some good levels of security built in. We had authentication lined up and ready. There are some slight concerns about, well, you've got to have parity with your other channels, and sometimes that can mean you're creating this amazingly slick experience in open banking, but it doesn't quite line up with your traditional digital banking. But overall, it's been an okay experience so far. Obviously, the consumer adoption is gradual. It's not exploded as yet. So the criminals haven't got lots and lots of false positives, lots and lots of genuine customer behaviour in there to hide in. So it's not a huge opportunity for them at the moment. But we've definitely seen some experimentation. I've certainly looked at it and thought, they could have just done that fraud in traditional online or mobile banking. Why did they choose to do open banking? Right. And I think it was just that experimentation, see what happens, what level of success do they get, and then iterate. But at the moment, I say it's still very, very early days.
Yeah, it's very easy to be slightly derailed and try and find the new way to tackle the fraud, which perhaps can be done traditionally. But we do live in an era of open data, Chris, and I wonder what you feel about that in terms of its power to help fight fraud.
Yes, I think it's an interesting question. I think when we look at at open banking as an example, there's now, you would see in the digital identity space, people utilising data like that for the purposes of positive identification, supplementary KYC, for example, assuming that whomever the other lender is that you've accessed to open banking has actually refreshed KYC in the last 10 years. The other, I do think what open data really provides is more an ecosystem to allow financial services to share a taxonomy and indeed a technical infrastructure to introduce new solutions to solve specific types of fraud. So, for example, confirmation of payee may open up in the future the ability to risk score beneficiaries to help prevent an authorised push payment scam or potentially track money as it goes through a mule chain.
And this collaboration has been on our lips for a very long time. The thing is, I guess, how do we kick that forward, do you think, Phil? How do we start to make collaboration something that is going to happen industry-wide? I don't know how you guys are in the audience today are feeling about this, but how do you feel, Phil?
Well, I find it fascinating that I can take my mobile phone and I can watch all the series of Game of Thrones on it, no problem. I find it fascinating that Facebook can target me specifically with a particular ad because they know I like DIY and power drills. But I find it
Don't we all?
Don't we all? Exactly. But I struggle to believe that when we say it potentially as banks, that once your money leaves your account, it's gone. And it's like, well, hold on, the underlying plumbing runs on one system. So we should be able to exactly pinpoint where the money goes. So, and I know that there's work being done on that, but I literally think there should be a button that says, okay, my money has gone to this, and this, and then it went to an ATM. Thank you very much. Number one. Number two, as banks, I think we should be able to real-time collaborate as soon as we know something has gone wrong. So as soon as a customer has actually told us, yeah, I have been defrauded, you guys haven't detected it, we should be able to trace the money and then immediately do something about that, which at the moment isn't happening. And I think that's a huge opportunity.
With such granularity in the data, Simon, surely that's soon going to be possible. It's not a mindset thing anymore, really, is it? It's about literally working together and sharing systems, sharing data at least.
I hope so. I'm always asking for more data. I run an analytics team. That's kind of my life, and that's what keeps taking us forward. But I think broader in the collaboration area, people talk openly about fraud in this industry. In my experience, I've been in here 15 years. They always have done. There's very little kind of competitive edge out there. People want to share, and there are lots of vehicles through which that happens. I just think perhaps at times it's a bit confused. There are too many. And if the criminals were watching us, what would they say? What would they think? I think they would possibly think, well, great, they're actually thinking about this. They've got some ideas, and some of them are quite good. And they seem to know a little bit about how we're attacking them and what we might do next. But when it comes to actually delivering a solution, getting them together and building something and implementing it, it's taken them like 5 years. Let's just crack on, because we've got a huge opportunity to continue what we're doing whilst they faff about trying to implement this technical solution.
The technology is there. The networks are there. It's our ability as organizations to actually collaborate, I think, is where the challenge is.
So how much can you do to release that function so that it can be automated, can respond very quickly?
$1 million question, I would say.
Right.
I think certainly as a financial services industry, what we struggle with is truly do test and learn. Let's build something and see what happens, right? We have committees and sponsor committees and executive committees that then talk about the test and learn, and even that just takes 6 months before we even get to anything. If I went to a startup and said, hey, can you spin up a server, get something in the cloud, they can do that in 24 hours, right? But as soon as it's financial services, of course, it's extremely regulated on, we can't do this. And I understand the reticence and the reluctance among the institutions, but I think we need to find a way to experiment in a safer environment so that we can do true test and learn.
Chris, tell us about, I'm going to call it FRAM-L. I could be wrong.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I could just quickly reflect on
Do.
the previous point. I mean, in terms of how do we best approach collaboration, how do we, what is the best way to do it? What's the $1 million question? Well, it has to be, what's the incentive? How can we, as an industry, quantify the benefit of bringing siloed data sources together, of bringing siloed counter-fraud data providers together, of allowing us to share bulk data at pace, at the right time, for the right moment, to help either disrupt organised criminal activity or indeed, transactional issues that may be opportunistic. I mean, it's the case of you can either hit them with a stick via regulation, which will take time and will inevitably happen eventually.
And it'll be behind the times as well.
Yeah, exactly, by the time it's implemented. Or indeed, we can get together and quantify what the benefit will be. How big, juicy and orange is the carrot? And if it's big, juicy and orange enough to justify the multi-million-pound investment it would take for our industry to improve the ecosystem, then we would all collectively want to do it.
Yeah.
So onto FRAML. So somebody said FRAML to me, and I thought they were saying Family. No, that's just what we are. In fraud and financial crime, notwithstanding the song. I think it was touched on very well by Francisco earlier in the crossover between fraud and financial crime. We have a tangible example where we did an exercise with UK Finance and Karen Baxter, the MD for Economic Crime at UK Finance, formerly the City of London Police, where we looked at some of the data that we hold at Synectics, identified some sort of volumetric analysis, looking at things like high velocity postcodes, high velocity individual phone numbers, IP addresses, things like that. We found an incidence of where there was a particular block of flats in Cardiff where over the space of 2 months there have been 1,155 bank accounts opened across 22 different lenders. Now, that's not illegal to open 1,155 bank accounts, but it certainly is suspicious. Yeah, exactly. It's smelly stuff. And then, and it was to sort of demonstrate that within the fraud data that we process in our consortium, across the 150 members that use us in the UK, there's actually underlying intelligence in there that could allow you to make more effective decisions as to, clearly there's a mule herder here.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really bothers me is we always talk about money mules. Who cares about money mules? The problem is the mule herders. How do we stop mules becoming a thing in the first place?
Yeah.
And looking at things like that, anomalous activity on a macro scale across the industry is really what I think FRAML should demonstrate.
Yeah.
When it comes to sharing data between fraud and financial crime teams on an organisation-by-organisation basis, I'm sure Simon will be able to talk about just as why that can sometimes be a difficult idea, as to why it can sometimes be seen as a good idea.
Simon?
Yeah, I think there's a lot conceptually that makes sense. You've got a predicate offence there in the fraud, and then a money laundering process taking place to hide the original origin of the money. But actually, when you try and do that in practice, it can be quite difficult. We've had a bit of success, so we've brought together our financial crime teams and our fraud teams, and we've had a bit of success in looking at money mule activity. We've had a bit of success in looking at models that we operate. So we've got some unsupervised models in our AML space that definitely have a potential in our fraud space as well, particularly with APP scams, as we've talked about a lot. So there's definitely some opportunities there. It's probably early stages for us because we've only recently created FRAML, as we're calling it. But there's a lot to go at in there, I think.
Yeah. Let's go and look at the wider changes in the market, which, Chris, you referred to there. In May, the FCA announced that it was delaying the enforcement of strong customer authentication until March next year, 2022. If you're watching this in March 2022, it's happening. What are the implications, do you think?
Well, let's be clear what they actually delayed.
Yeah.
Because SCA is already in place for certain transactions,
Yeah.
like logins, setting up new beneficiaries.
Yes.
Where it has been delayed is e-commerce. Yeah. And what it means is basically that people can still go to Amazon and buy their stuff without having to enter a two-factor authentication process here. And it's just given customers a bit of breathing space and banks a bit of breathing space to make sure that everybody that needs it gets all the pieces in place so they can authenticate using their mobile, their landline, the app, or whatever it is that they need.
Yeah. And it's we've all, I think, experienced it, and it may be a step that we wouldn't want to have to take, but actually it's very, very effective. It seems to be closing down a few of the gaps. What do you feel?
Again, I'm going to talk as the human-centered designer.
Please do,
here.
yeah.
It's not as difficult as people think it is necessarily.
Yeah.
Yes, it is potentially a small disruption in the process which says, hey, click a button in order to approve something, but it's definitely not as disruptive as having to enter a password.
Absolutely.
I think the key thing that we need to consider there is which authentication methods do we use. And one thing that I advocate everywhere I go, passwords need to die. Because anything memory-based as an authentication method, whether it's password, memorable information, pins, whatever you want to call it, is just bad by design. Because as human beings, we're really, really crap at remembering something that is 16 characters long, has a special character, 2 numbers, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Whereas we have other authentication methods, such as biometrics, such as device-based authentication, which are really easy to use. People that use biometrics on their phone do it every day, hundreds of times a day when they unlock their phone. Have no problem with it. Yeah. And they, more often than not, can actually just click a button and say, right, open this with my face, done. The whole thing takes less than 2 seconds. So it's not the fact that we have authentication in place for e-commerce, it's which authentication methods we use. Yeah. And there's also huge potential to use other authentication methods which are not there or not as common, such as voice and other biometric methods.
I just want to remind you in our audience today, while you're live, that you can send a question to us. We'd love to hear your final questions of the day. They can be as challenging as you like. We can't promise we'll answer them, but we'll give it a go. So do send us a question through the app. That would be wonderful to hear from you since you've stayed with us right till the end. Crypto. We were warned earlier on that every time I mention that, I'm sorry, I jumped you with that. It gives a shudder down the spine. What do you feel in terms of a broad conversation about crypto?
A bit of fun. So there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in there. And then there's 2 big opportunities that criminals are exploiting at the moment. The first is money laundering. Yeah. So they've got a whole new place where they can launder the proceeds of crime, which is out of my reach from a monitoring point of view, which is quite scary. There's shudders down the spine there. But I'm confident that with the infrastructure that's there and the blockchain technology, the analytics can progress so that we can start to have visibility of that, and actually probably in a much better way than we can see some of the traditional financial transactions, for example, cash.
Yeah.
I think this is going to be a much better way in the future of tracing the movement of funds.
Yeah.
Phil mentioned earlier, I wish there was a button I could press. Maybe his wish will be granted at some point with the blockchain analytics. The second big opportunity that the criminals are exploiting is scams.
Yeah.
This is just a wonderful market in which to convince a potential investor, someone who's worried about the impact of inflation on their cash at the moment, somebody who's interested in the growing utility of crypto assets. We've seen the scripts from criminals that customers have provided to us post a scam, and they're listing these things that are very, very logical, and are the reasons that quite prominent investors and tech companies are plowing money into crypto assets. And the customer's just playing them back to us over the phone or in a branch saying, this is why I'm doing it, here's my rationale, this is the research I've done.
Well, because it's rational.
And it sounds quite credible because there's some basis to it.
Yeah.
So those two are very much the things that we're wrestling with. But as I mentioned, I think there's opportunity there in the future as we get our heads around this and it becomes more and more adopted, which I think it will.
I'll get your thoughts on that, Chris. But yeah, Phil, it goes back to what you were saying
Crypto.
about and fraudsters convincing us lot to volunteer the stuff.
So one of the things that makes scams work again and again and again is hope.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's hope that if it's a romance scam, that I'm not going to be lonely, that if it's a bank impersonation scam, that I'm not going to lose my money, and if it is an investment scam, that I'm going to get rich.
Yeah.
And with crypto specifically, it's, well, look at all these other people that have already gotten rich, or seemingly have gotten rich, and I'm going to invest in something that I fundamentally do not understand. Yeah. But that's okay because it's technology and Elon Musk does it, so it must be okay.
And somebody I know may have done it too.
Exactly. Yeah. And speaking of somebody I know, listen to the Missing Crypto Queen, the BBC podcast, about OneCoin, which
Absolutely
was a gigantic scam worth $8 billion.
Yeah.
Right?
Chris, what do you think?
Well, I think when it comes to being duped into a cryptocurrency scam, we're almost willingly duped now by our friends. I mean, I've got one of my friends who works at Synaptics. Is every single week is telling me the new way you were going to make millions on some cryptocurrency based off some random dog meme or whatever it might be. I often say, oh well, to be fair, if you look
can I have that person's contact details?
Yeah, if you look at that
interested.
chart, it's quite hard to argue with that.
When
you mention cryptocurrency doing a shudder through the spine, isn't particularly good for our marketing, but it reminds me when I was 19 years old, 10 years ago at university, where my housemate had 100 of these new things called bitcoins that it was a £12, it went down to 8 and he was furious. And he goes, you know what, Chris, do you want to buy them for £1,000? And I said, nah, this sounds like nonsense to me, that'll never take off. So probably my opinions on cryptocurrencies aren't that useful. I would just say that
how much would those be worth now?
We checked earlier, didn't we?
£4.5 million.
£4.5 million quid.
Okay, okay.
Chances, though, would 19-year-old Chris have held on to that cryptocurrency for a good period of time? Probably not. Would be the answer.
Your answers may be slightly different today if that was the case.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, well, hindsight's always 20/20.
So let's continue. We'll talk about customers for a few minutes. We've got 5 minutes left. So let's talk about. Some would say that customers have historically been the weak link, and potentially there's an element of that in what we've been talking about. But how can banks help customers to be a stronger link in the chain?
Well, number one, customers need to understand that they have a role to play when it comes to securing their own money, because customers mistakenly often believe that, well, if I send money from one bank to another, it's covered in the same way that a credit card is. It's not. And number two, I think as banks, we need to start targeting specific customers who are likely to fall victim to specific frauds, which we can predict based on their behavior. And that's not marketing data such as, your male and over 40, under 20, whatever, but specific algorithms that will tell us that. And then drive those with hyper-personalized messaging so that we change behavior.
COVID has seen a big increase in first-party fraud. Chris, how can we deal with that?
It's interesting to say, COVID has resulted in a big increase in first-party fraud. I think, yes, particularly over the period of March through August 2020, it's opportunistic like anything else. Right. I think, to throw another into the buzzwords, it's that balance between being scalable and being agile. There was a debate earlier hosted by IBM, I believe, talking about what is the best delivery option when you're looking at technology. Is it do we go down waterfall or do we use agile? Which is best for which? I mean, agility and being able to deliver things in an agile fashion is all well and good, but if you have a tactical issue where you need to respond very quickly and you want set up in order to do that in an unprecedented situation, then neither option works. It's just JFDI, which is not really a delivery methodology whatsoever, unless you're like a fintech startup.
Yeah.
So I think what the pandemic really showed, especially in terms of the increase of first-party fraud, is that unprecedented things do happen. The important thing is next time, now it is precedented. If we have to do BBLS again, have we made changes to the way that we are able to respond to these types of threats, if they just suddenly happen overnight, to prevent the type of fraud that happened there? I think it's very much there's a lot of lessons to be learned. I think the question is when and how do we learn them?
Absolutely.
And then what changes do we actually need to enact in order to make sure that doesn't happen again?
Yeah, absolutely. A final thing to you, Simon. A warning to everybody here. I think we're talking to the converted, but what happens if we don't tackle this stuff or continue to tackle this stuff tomorrow?
So I think we're heading towards more and more of our fraud going towards social engineering, whether it's strong customer authentication, whether it's advancements in modelling or analytics that improves detection capabilities. The criminals kind of know what we're doing, what we're investing in these areas. So I think they're increasingly going to target the customer. And the customer's increasingly going to suffer harm potentially as a result of that. So we have to get ahead of that as much as we can. It's never been more important to get active in that prevention layer where you can educate, raise awareness, because it's just not a problem we can solve with the traditional levers we've been pulling in our detection systems with rules over the years. There's a lot more to it than that. And if we don't do that well, we know how quickly the criminals can capitalize and what the effects of that are on people and their end trust in their financial services provider, potentially their friends and their colleagues as a result.
Chris, I'm sure you echo that.
Yeah, I was actually going to say your final point, trust in financial services is the threat. I think we need to consider fraud or FRAML as something that plays into the wider conversation about operational resilience. Profit warnings can be sounded. There are previous examples of high-profile IT meltdowns resulting in massive increases in phishing and things like that. And the nature of news today is that currently, UK at least, if you think, I can't remember who it was, I think it was the Audit Commission, or whoever they are now, did an exercise to say, where do consumers trust the most with their data? And currently it is banking, but it's on a downward trend. And I think it's something we need to make sure that to maintain trust in banking, we need to make sure that customers know that their money is safe.
Absolutely.
Of course, it is definitely their own responsibility of that. But the consequence of not protecting customers is a loss of faith in financial services. They'll move over to Simon's cryptocurrency exchanges instead.
One thing I'd add to that is slow down. It's what we tell our customers. If something seems too good to be true, slow down, ask 3 people if it's legit. Same thing for banks. Slow down payments. If we can slow down a payment by an hour, 2 hours, that gives us breathing space to go back to the customer potentially and change it without necessarily stopping it, right? Or even giving the customer an hour to think about it, and suddenly they call us back 15 minutes later and I'm like, whoops, I think I've just been defrauded. It's fine, we've stopped it.
And it's the same thing that's 15 years ago as a journalist, as I'd investigate these things and I'd go out to meet scammers and scammed, would be circle back round. Same thing, circle back round. Don't take their word for it. Stop, circle back round, use a search engine and find out who they really are or find out the number you should be calling, and off you go. Okay, one question. We've got time. You've stayed with us till the end, so let's get one question in. Do you think using existing initiatives such as confirmation of payee and adding additional data points can help to enrich banks' data for fraud and also improve the customer experience at the same time? So confirmation of payee, adding additional data points. What do you think, Phil?
So confirmation of payee is definitely a right step in the right direction when it comes to preventing fraud. At the moment, the problem is if I get a non-match in confirmation of payee, I can still proceed with the payment and nothing happens. And I've just done that where I've been doing it for weeks and weeks for 2 transactions, and it makes no difference. So I think figuring out how we action a non-match is one thing. And sorry, what was the second point?
Confirmation of pay and also additional, let me just check.
Additional data, yes.
Yeah.
Any additional data, so specifically data around phone numbers. Because we use increasingly phones for authentication or phone-based authentication, if somebody could tell me this particular phone number has been associated with a person for the last 10 years, had 3 address changes, no changes in the past 5 years, says one thing. This phone number has been registered 2 weeks ago, bought in a corner shop, isn't registered with a person, tells me a different story.
Absolutely.
So phone number data would be huge.
And just on that point, I mean, we've recently done a proof of concept with a tier 1 institute in the UK where we've looked at exactly that. How do we take transactional information, beneficiary-related information, look it up against our underlying national SIRA data consortium to give you more data items to help you further triage the risk, be it that the actual beneficiary has been previously identified to be a mule or used to receive fraudulent or disputed funds from another one of our members, or indeed whether there's any individual data points associated with said bank account, which could also give you more information about that. So I know UK Finance as well are working on something very similar, and I think it's just a case again of making sure the fraud data ecosystem come together and come up with a practical solution which actually benefits consumers and institutions.
Okay, I think that's it. Thank you very much for staying with us till the end of the MoneyLIVE Autumn Festival. Wonderful to have you with us all day in the room and wherever you've been in the world. Thank you very much. Thanks to all of our speakers. Thanks to Phil, thanks to Simon, thanks to Chris, and everybody who's spoken in this room today in Studio 2. Now, it's time for the after party. See you there.
Do you want to dance?